what about jobs? And that's one of the biggest things that people ask: are there jobs in Australia? That's the biggest question that I had when I was planning for my AMC1 exam, because you read all these disheartening and these posts on Facebook and on social media regarding how there are no jobs left in Australia. The only jobs that you might be able to get would either be psychiatry or general practice, which some people really enjoy and they really want to do that. But for other people, that might be the biggest decision why they might not want to come to Australia, because they don't want to do psychiatry, they don't want to go into the GP pathway. And ultimately, that I just want to say that that's not true. We've come through. I came through in 2017. I was able to get a job. Then after that, after me, a lot of my friends have come through. A lot of my juniors have come through, and they've been able to secure a job. So that's true. Some people might wait for a year or 6 months before they get their job, but ultimately they have been able to get a job.
I want to highlight here one point from my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that after AMC1 you can get a job on limited registration, but a lot of those jobs are a bit more periphery or rural based, because a lot of the metro hospitals are not allowed to give jobs to limited registered doctors.
With the APRA, these are the 3 registrations that I've highlighted: your limited registration, provisional, as well as general registration. Now, theoretically speaking, once you've done your IELTS or whatever English exam that you've done, PTE, TOEFL, whatever you've done, and you've done AMC1, and you've got 12 months of experience as a house officer, or you've done your house job back in Pakistan or whatever country you're from, then theoretically speaking, on paper, you are eligible for limited registration and you can apply for a job. However, there's scarcity of these jobs. Not every hospital offers these jobs. Only some rural hospitals might offer it. And if they do, then that's a brilliant start for you, because even without doing an AMC clinical exam, you're already into the work stream, into the job pathway, and you can practice your clinical exam while you're working, while you're doing the job in the Australian healthcare system, which is an ideal thing. I try to do the same thing. When I did my MC1, I did my IELTS, I completed my house job, and while I was preparing for my MC2, I started applying for jobs in limited registration. And I think at that time I applied to 76 hospitals, and I just got a reply from, I got reply for about 14, and one of them offered me an interview, but one of them shortlisted me, but I wasn't offered an interview with that particular hospital. So it is possible, and some of my colleagues have actually come to Australia in the last couple of years with the COVID, when Australia's got a job shortage at the moment with registrars and residents, and they've been able to accept some doctors on limited registration, and that's an ideal pathway if you've just done AMC1. However, if you've completed your AMC1 and 2, you've got the AMC certificate, you've got
the chances will increase.
You'll then be able to, you'll be eligible for provisional registration, and automatically you'll have a high chance of securing a job in Australia. And you'll be starting off at PGY2, which will be at a level of a junior house officer or a hospital medical, or HMO, as they call it in Victoria. So that's provisional registration. And once you worked here for 12 months in Australia, which your mandatory rotations in surgery, ED, as well as medicine, then you were given general registration. And then,
so I would like to highlight here, this is where the AMC and combinatory pathway differ a little bit. In combinatory, there's no mandatory rotation. You can do 1 year in one rotation and you can still get general afterwards.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, for if you're going through your standard pathway, if you've done your AMCs, and after your AMC you've done IELTS, then you need that 12 months supervised practice. and it has to be mandatory rotation for these. But for competent authority pathway, you might be able to just do 1 year without having these subspecialties, and you still might be able to get it. If you've done AMC Part 1, another pathway to get general registration is that if you haven't been able to get an AMC 2 spot, or you've not prepared for that, or you haven't been able to give that at any point in time, then you can apply for workplace-based assessment. And again, you can go through Google search through workplace-based assessments, and it will show you the list of hospitals that actually offer this, and you can personally apply to those hospitals for workplace-based assessment, which basically means for 12 months you'll have different assessments with your supervisor, and after 12 months, if you pass all those assessments, you will automatically be given the AMC certificate, and you don't necessarily have to sit for your AMC 2 exam. I briefly touched on the RMO campaigns. The different states have different RMO campaigns, and I'll discuss that in the next slide. But very important to go to each and every state, look at their RMO campaigns, and see when are they actually starting and finishing. Because that's the imperative. At the end, all these AMC exams, the ultimate end goal for us is that we want to apply for jobs. We want to get a job. And the RMO campaigns will give you that timeline. What is that time frame when you can actually apply for the campaign? And automatically, you can time your AMC clinical exam depending upon those dates. If, for example, you've applied through all those RMO campaigns and you haven't been able to get a job, then the next thing is to apply for observerships. That's very important. Two of my colleagues have been able to get a job in Western Australia and in Melbourne, in Victoria. Depending upon, based on their observership. They didn't get any jobs to begin with RMO campaigns. Then they applied for observership. They did observership for 3 months. This is an unpaid, it's more like a shadowing where you're with a team and you're not allowed to do any procedures, but you can still observe procedures.
Yeah, in England it's called a clinical attachment, same thing.
Yeah. And once you've done that, once you've done an observership, it's about building a rapport with that team, and whether or not they can give you a recommendation letter, or they can decide to be your referee when you apply for that RMO campaign. And that's really helpful, because it in the long term, if you apply to that hospital and they are the consultants there are your referees, it just talks in your favor. For example, when I was in my med school, in my final year, I did an elective, which was just for a month. I came to Melbourne in one of the hospitals and applied. I did an elective, and I attended the radiology meetings. I attended their handovers. I presented cases on a daily basis, and ultimately they were able to give me a recommendation letter. And both my supervising consultant, they agreed to be my referees. And when I was applying for my RMO campaigns, as opposed to having my Pakistani supervisor, I had Australian supervisors as my referees. You still need someone that's worked with you in the last 12 months, and that's where your Pakistani or your own country's supervisors will come to practice. Some of the people often talk about recency of practice. They either after marriage they've come here, or they haven't been able to work back in their country for a couple of years, and that is where the recency of practice comes in. Because on your CV, you have to justify every single gap that you have. If you have a gap of more than a few months, more than 2 to 3 months, you have to justify and show it on your CV that where were you, what were you doing at that time. And some people might not get a job just because they haven't worked for about 2 years or 3 years, and that is when we talk about either doing observership or doing a GP attachment, or going back to going back to Pakistan or whatever country you're from, and doing it for at least 3 to 6 months of rotation, even if it's a paid rotation that adds on to your CV, that you're up to date with the current practice. Goes without saying, a CV is a piece of paper that determines your future. When you hand over that CV to that RMO campaign and it gets processed by a HR representative, and that passes on to the supervisor who will be taking your interviews, you have to sell yourself in CV. And start thinking about that in your final year. Start thinking about that as soon as you graduate in your internship here. Ask around. Is there anyone who's doing a publication? Can you be a part of it? Is there anyone who's doing a research article? Can you be a part of it? Can you do their audit? Can you help them in their audit? Can you help them in their data collection? Because that goes a long way. And that can sometimes be the difference between two CVs. Has someone done any research publications? Have you done an audit? Have you done workshops? Have you done poster presentations? Have you attended any workshops or seminars? And that adds on to your to the bulk of your CV. And if that does, that shows that you are committed, that you're not just not looking for a job, that you actually want to pursue medical education and you want to improve your knowledge, skills, and clinical practice as well. Calling. A lot of times we have this tendency that we want to hide behind emails. We'll formulate a generic email and we'll send it across to 100 hospitals if we get email addresses of these hospitals and we just send them through. I just feel that that's not an efficient way. It might be a it might be a time-saving strategy, but if you call, then the other line on the other end, the person might be able to assess that you're desperate, assess that you're willing, assess that you're enthusiastic, and that you want to be part of their workforce, and that sometimes is the difference. You might call 20 places, 25 places, 15 of them might tell you, hey, there's a campaign, this is a generic link, just call onto that, just send your CV to that link, which is fine, that's reasonable. Some people might say, oh, hey, can you personally send me your CV? And that 5 to 10% of people who actually personally want to receive your CV might offer you a job, might offer you an interview outside the RMO campaign. And that's important. So definitely calling is very important. I get this question a lot, especially for some of my colleagues who are back in Pakistan. What are the wage rates and whether or not we on any website, for example, I work for Queensland Health, and just here, level 1 is when you graduated from med school. Level 2 is 1 year after your internship or house job. Level 3, and it just gives you what your annual income is, what your hourly rate is, how much would you be earning, and especially when you jump up from this to a registrar level, what your pay would be, and once you become a consultant, what your pay would go, and this is just the basic pay. That doesn't include your overtime. In Australia, if you work an extra hour beyond what has been allocated, then you'll be paid double. You'll be paid penalty rates. There will be penalty rates, which means 1.5 or 2 times your base rate if you're working on a Sunday, if you're working after hours, and if you're working overtime, and that adds on to your pay cycle. This is per fortnight, so it's not a per month salary. In Australia, you're paid after every 14 days. So as opposed to having 24, 20, as opposed to having 12, as opposed to having pays for 12 months, you'll ultimately get 26 pay slips, and you'll be paid 26 times. That will be 52 weeks. Ultimately, some people are offered interviews. Once you've completed your AMC exams, you're hoping for an interview. And if you have an interview, then the next question is, what kind of interview questions would I be getting? And I would just recommend, if you just Google HMO interview questions for Northern doctors. This is from the hospital where I did my electives, that's Northern Health. And I think that's a presentation by Dr. Carol Chong, who's one of my supervisors. And it gives you, it's just a presentation which is available online on Google, and it tells you different questions that might be asked. And it just gives you a sense, an idea of what kind of questions are they asking for regarding behavior management, regarding interpersonal conflict, communication skills, regarding clinical scenarios. And it goes through different questions. And that in that PowerPoint slide, it also has a link for PMCV site in which they've got given about, I think, 25 questions, or what kind of questions do they actually ask in interviews for jobs. And if you've got a good idea regarding what kind of questions, then it gives you it gives you time to actually formulate answers for those questions. So I found that really handy. These are all the websites that I've listed here, just so that you can have a look that every single state will have a different campaign website. You personally have to go individually in each website, try to find what are the campaign dates, and so that you can time your exam according to that. And then at the bottom of the page, I've added on some generic job that you can actually try to find job scenario job options here in the general category as well, outside the RMO campaign.